We are now 9 episodes into our South Pacific build of Bali High, and at this point, we've got the feel of the island nailed down. In today's episode, we'll be diving into the organic development of New Suva, the main town, with a perfect blend of building types and assets. Here's what we're going to be covering. So we'll be expanding our local education with some custom assets made specifically for this build. You'll not have seen them anywhere else. I also want to improve the employment opportunities with expansion of industry and commercial zones, and we're going to need enough housing to support that expansion. Finally, we'll be taking our time with some key detailing, and we'll even have a look at some new surface options launched on PDX mods. So let's crack on. So to kick things off, what I wanted to do was to get the big buildings in place and get our university done. So I have pretty much had this area earmarked for development, and it kind of makes sense really, just tucked in behind the main street. We can fit some bigger buildings in here, and I reckon it's going to look the part, and it should be a sort of organic growth, if you like, from the actual town itself. So the buildings that I'm going to be using here have been made by KSCS2. He was kind enough to offer to make a few of these buildings. This university is going to have the main building, which is in white. That's the small university asset. And there's a couple of different classroom expansion buildings as well. So this green roofed one, is an expansion building. And then we're going to use the second one, which is quite a bit smaller. We're going to be using a couple of them either side of the main building as well. And they are fully functional. They definitely do work. And we'll have a look at the end and we'll see sort of how many students move in and see how effective it is. Now obviously this is off the main road, so I definitely want to keep the roads very small here, much in line with what you would see in Fiji itself. And to help with that, we'll be using some net lanes later on, and we'll kind of pick what we think is the most effective match for the size of development surrounding it. So here you see the little buildings going in place, and that pretty much concludes the university build. Now obviously there's a lot more work to get that looking decent, but in terms of popping the main buildings, that's pretty much it. Now, I wanted to add some government type buildings, and it kind of makes sense to try and find something that maybe looks a little bit colonial in design. There's very limited options for this, so really we're looking at the vanilla colonial buildings, and that first one is just too big really. It was looking out of place, and I think perhaps we might be able to fit it in somewhere else in the build later down the line, but for this one it was just going to be too large. So what we've landed on here is one of the expansions from that same asset, one of the add-ons, and I'm going to slot it in just on the main street. It has a pretty nice little plot of land over there that's kind of begging to be built on, and I reckon we're going to be able to get that all detailed up and looking pretty good. Now of course we do have some creator packs coming. This was recorded before they were released, so potentially we've got some options to add some of these later on. And one content creator pack I am going to be using is the UK pack. Going to be using Welshman's petrol station here, pretty good fit, and we'll pop a couple of decals down here, but I reckon that is looking pretty good. Definitely something that we're missing from the build so far. Now I reckon that strip of land, we've got options to build it on, and I think across the road from the governmental building that we've just put down, you can see the stairs here. I reckon we've got some more options to potentially maybe build out some more government buildings. So behind the hospital, the government buildings and the university that we've put down here, I want to have a strip of some sort of higher end buildings. Now when I was doing the research and having a look at Suva itself in Fiji on Google Maps, I found that there was a little bit of an area where we have embassies, and those embassies are pretty varied in terms of scale and different colours and all that kind of stuff. And I found a Chinese one there rather, super colourful, really bright purple, and I want to try and get a bit of that into the build as well. Now this build, of course, I've not described it as a specific nation as such. It's an unspecified island in the Pacific Ocean, so I'm not going to be doing embassies or any of that kind of stuff, but I think I would definitely like to have that sort of higher end building, along the waterfront. I think it makes sense, and it would be a nice contrast to the really repeatable ones that we put in so far. But here and there where we can, we'll add a few little extra assets, and I think some swimming pools in the backyard kind of makes sense to go along with it. So we'll get that colour injection just now. As I said, I wanted that bright purple. I'd love to put it on the roof, but sadly not an option with the recolouring options on these particular assets. Now most of these assets, if I remember correctly, I think are from the Japanese pack, but they fit pretty well, and as I say, we'll just do a little bit of colour magic on them as well. Now swinging over to our commercial, I did mention at the beginning, I want to expand some of our commercial and some of our industrial, and I'm going to have a play about with it and a little bit of an experimentation really. I would like to build up the density and build up the height somewhat, but I think I maybe took it a little bit too far, but we'll talk about that in a minute or two. For the industry, I would like to have a nice tight row of development, and this strip, I can kind of see this as being maybe an automotive centre, you know, when they have several garages all in one street. Came across that in Google Maps. I've seen it before in other countries as well. They're all sort of bunched, you know, within one area, and I kind of like to create that to a certain degree here as well. Now, we definitely want to leave some space at the front of each of the units. That should have some space there for working on the cars and the vehicles and whatnot. Again, I think it makes sense. We can have a look how it kind of expands out from the town centre, and I think having that little area there, kind of separate but adjoining, kind of makes sense. Now what I wanted to do was really expand and have a bit of an experiment really in terms of the heights, and kind of make my mind up whether or not really that sort of elevation on a building is going to work here or not. Wasn't convinced, not going to lie. So I want to have plenty of parking here as well. Got a real lack of it actually in the town. There's no roadside parking down here on these small streets either. So plenty of options, and you can see the parking's getting pretty busy already in fact. So as we start to build out some of the road networks in this part of the build, that's going to take us nicely into our next chapter, and we're going to get some population in here. Now, of course, we're adding plenty of employment opportunities in the build today with our commercial and our industry and our college and all the rest of it. But of course, on previous episodes, if you cast your mind back, we've also had plenty of other development preceding this. So most recently, we created that luxury beach resort. We've got the forestry operation up and running as well, and we've got some agriculture with the sugar industry, not to mention the airport that we added in the previous video. So it definitely makes sense to really crack on and cram in as much residential as we can in the build. Now, as you kind of seen there with the kind of higher density stuff, it is looking, for my money, it's looking a little bit out of place, and we'll be revisiting that. We'll be bringing down the skyline a little bit. But I want to try and make it nice and dense as we can without looking, you know, like it's back-to-back buildings. Again, that really wouldn't make sense for a town this size either. The assets that I'm going to be using here are just really mostly the vanilla ones. We have got one or two of the Eastern European ones in there just to kind of mix things up a little bit, and again, we're just using the very smallest ones. Didn't want to use them too much. The colours are kind of wild on it, but they do look pretty cool, and the colours are kind of wild in obviously Fiji as well. Now, we will have plenty of opportunity obviously to make these buildings fit into the surroundings and give them a little bit of character through recolour and plenty of prop work. In terms of the layout, I did want things to look sort of fairly organic and not too organised. That said, we do have an opportunity to have a little bit of a grid system, and again, we're not going to be following any sort of set sizes or patterns or anything like that. I think a definitive coastal road kind of makes sense here as well, and again, it's going to give us an opportunity to bring some of the properties right up to the beachfront. I am on purpose going to be leaving a bit of a development space here, as you can see on the right hand side, and the reason for that is that I want to ask you guys what you would like to see in here. My initial thoughts are we've got the potential for perhaps maybe a bigger or maybe not so fancy, you know, sort of hotel district, or at least a development. I think we've got potential maybe for some beach bars. I think that might look pretty cool, but I'm interested to hear from you folks what you think might be a good option here as well. So whatever you can think of, stick them in the comments. If we've got plenty of them, I'll maybe put it as a poll on the community page. I think that would be pretty cool. But yeah, let me know. Now, you are going to see me spend a bit of time on the roads. Now, I just removed some of the decoration that we had already, and really underlying this was the dirt road, and then previously I had used surfaces on it because that's the best we had at the time. But I think now we've got plenty of more options, and we can mix and match a little bit and try and get what I reckon is a better combination. So I did remove some of the existing decorations on the road, and what I want to do is to try and have a bit of a mix of concrete or asphalt, and I want to have those dirt roads as well. We're going to be using again those dirt road netlines. Along the sections that I am going to be keeping as concrete or asphalt, I am going to use Broman's dirt surfaces, and we're just going to put a light layer of dirt on them. I just want to kind of break up the really sort of synthetic look of the vanilla stuff. Nothing too fancy, nothing too complicated, you just simply trace around with the surface. Now, dirt roads, as I said, I'm going to use again those dirt roads, which are awesome, and we'll be using the decals that go along with that. And where you have that sort of line that's caused by the end of the decal, or the net line rather, we'll use the corresponding decal and we'll just cover it up. I love these, they're so simple to use and they really do add quite a bit of character to any build. As you can probably imagine, once we've got the vegetation all in here and a few more decals to break things up a bit, it'll look really good. So my thinking along here with the different types of roads was really just to have obviously minor roads, but have that differentiation obviously between the different surfaces that you'd find on the road themselves. Now, I did want to have a sort of main road, if you like, sort of towards the back of the town, and that's going to hold our police station as well as our university that we put in today. But also with the super minor roads, you know, the dirt ones, really just to kind of stick residential on there. And I wanted to have a main road running down towards our future beach development. Now here beside the industrial, we've got a nice little plot of land, and we've got an idea that should fill that up pretty nicely. We'll give some amenity to our town residents. Should look really nice. And one sort of bit of detailing that I always like to put in this build is the overground electricity cables. Looks class, makes such a big difference even before we even add any vegetation in. But I reckon now that we've got that in place, it's time to come back and have a look at that commercial and some of the larger buildings that we put in at the beginning of the build. Let's have a look at those apartment buildings, and I think on reflection, there's just a little bit too much. I think if the town was a bit busier, we could certainly get away with it, but I think that transition from 4-story down to single-story is just a little bit too much. As I said, it fits pretty well with everything else that's sitting there, but I don't like that transition. I think it's just too much of a jump. So let's get them ripped out. Let's have a look at some of the alternatives and try and figure something out. So I just really went with some commercial vanilla assets. They work perfectly fine here, and we'll just join them together using one of the Japanese ones. Gonna get that recolored as well, and we'll get something a wee bit more colourful in here. Let's have a little look just to see how the rough street level scene appears. I think that's looking alright. I think we definitely need to spend a wee bit of time on the surfaces and the paving, but yeah, I think that's a better mix. So around the back, I thought perhaps we could maybe do some parking, and then I decided to actually put in a little bit of industrial. It's a nice little transition, I guess, from industrial to commercial there as well. It does also give us a little courtyard in the middle that we can detail up, so that's always welcome too. A few extra buildings linked together, and we'll just extend that industrial around. And fire, that pretty much shouldn't be happening because we do have a functional working fire station again. We did swing back over here and revisit it, and I reckon the reason why we don't have the local fire engines coming out here and actually putting out the fire, you can see there just a minute ago, it was the fire helicopters from our neighbouring island that came in and saved the day there. It's actually a little bit too late, it's just a little bit too far away actually to be effective. So I went back, we just deleted off the prop fire appliances, and that should enable the actual building to work. Now remember, if you put them out the front, it will block the functional ones from spawning, and you won't have the fire coverage there. So that's an issue, and it's really an issue in this build because everything's plopped down, and trying to remember or go back and having a look, to see what was there previously is a real pain in the backside. So I want to try and avoid that at all costs, and we'll make sure we've got some proper fire protection. Now, a huge part of this build is, of course, the vegetation. It features heavily in every single episode that we have so far. This episode will be no different. I want to have a nice, big, thick, lush forest, almost, if you like, in and amongst all of the buildings. Really does look the part in this one. I'm pretty much be using the same sort of palette, that we did previously. I want to get a pretty thick layer of smaller palms, so we have those nice big leaves. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sort of filling the gaps and adding a bit of contrast with some of the oaks in just a minute as well. But it makes sense, we're going to be adding a little bit of variation with these other palm trees, and it just gives a bit of a different shape, and it gives you some different shadows in your landscape, so always welcome. What's also welcome is new members on our Patreon. So a big shout out to Miguelito, Paulo, Sam, Vespas Diesel and Ben. You join these legends in supporting the channel every month. The generosity of these members directly helps the channel pump out content, and it covers the costs that I have to do so. So in addition to that, they also get access to game saves, except the Bali High one, work in progress photo updates, they get a name to video credit, occasional YouTube shoutouts, early access to the videos when possible, and they get a Patreon supporter role in the Discord as well. So if you want to support the channel, Patreon's the best way, links are in the description. Thanks very much. In terms of the detailing, there's nothing too complex. The majority of it is of course just picking the right vegetation. Then you can kind of go around a little bit later on, we'll remove some of the fencing that we don't need, and we're definitely going to be adding plenty of sunken bushes, and we'll get that sort of overgrowth as well. Having all of that sort of layered up means that you don't necessarily have to go too heavy on the decals, but we will be adding some of them later on. I want to try and add a little bit of sand as well. But let's take a quick spin through it and see how it's looking so far. I think it's looking pretty decent. Now I'm not really sure why I focused on this little house in particular. I thought it looked cute, looks pretty nice. I wouldn't mind living there, to be honest. It looks decent, doesn't it? But yeah, I reckon the whole neighbourhood's looking like a pretty decent place to stay. And taking a swing around this way, I think you can really tell how much heavy lifting those road net lanes do. Plenty of rough little detail along the edge, and there's a sort of definitive pedestrian path there as well, which is pretty good. Although we haven't done anything at all on the roads really here apart from add a basic surface, you can really see how at a street level the correct choice of vegetation really does bring everything to life. So along the actual beach fronts themselves, I didn't want to develop right up to the sand. I think that would have been obviously a little bit too much. I think potentially with the area of land that we've left untouched, maybe we can do something of a similar ilk down there, but down here I wanted it to kind of have a bit of a natural look and a bit of a natural feel, and I did still want those beachfront properties to be beachfront properties, so obviously no development in there. What I did is I created a little bit of a sand dune really, and I think as you can kind of zoom in, you might be able to see the changes of elevation on the beach as well, and they look pretty cool. I think not going too overboard with the vegetation is key there, and again same idea with the decals as well. Using the decals and the surfaces, we just create a few little paths that might have naturally formed with people walking down to the beach, and it's a real nice addition, and as I said, not too wild in terms of development, and a pretty nice contrast to the rest of the build. Now these little edges are great. I think I should have probably checked out the net lanes. I know that there are edge net lanes as well available of course, but I'm not too sure how they would match colour wise, so that's something I maybe need to have a little look at next time. That said, little details like that, they're the ones that really make the build stand out. Now for me it's all about getting balance, because one, I want to get cracking on with these little details, but two, I want to be able to get videos out at a reasonable pace. So for me it's just picking and choosing a few little areas here and there, and then we just concentrate on them where it's going to really make the biggest impact. Now on the other side of the beach here, I'm going to kind of repeat the sort of process to a certain degree, and we'll just create a little path. But I did want to have a little bit of an area for locals where they can go down and enjoy the beach. And maybe they can bring a barbecue down here, enjoy the sunset away from any of the tourists. Now I would recommend you put a barbecue on one of them wooden benches right enough, or any of the tables, but it's a nice little corner and a little bit quieter and a little bit less developed. Now, I do tend to go pretty light on the line tool, but I think certainly beachfronts particularly, and tourist areas and whatnot, or leisure areas, they do kind of lend themselves to a little bit of repetition in terms of the spacing with the vegetation and whatnot. Now we will use some of that vegetation just to hide some of the gaps underneath this little beach cafe, and a couple of simple props, and we got a nice cool little area where the locals can come in and just chill out by the beach. So the final little bit of work to do then, and I did mention it earlier on, is just to add a little bit of sand here and there. I'm not going to get too mad, I'm not necessarily going to fill every surface or cover every existing surface. I think rather I just want to add a little bit of an accent to it more than anything else, and we just kind of break up any of the planar grass surfaces that we have, and it's pretty effective. As I said, a lot of the ground is covered by vegetation anyway, so we don't have to go too mad on this. So with the vast majority of the residential stuff in place and looking good to go, it's time to come back and revisit our commercial zone. If you can catch your mind back to the beginning of the video, I wanted this to be something of an automotive alley. So I want this to feature a bit of a mix of old and new, and the first thing I'm going to do is have a mini junkyard down here. Super simple, just going to plop down some of the junkyard assets from the San Francisco pack, and we're going to use some of the junk piles and whatnot and just going to slot them in underneath. A little bit of rubble to hide some of the grass, and then once we've got the rubble, and I want to make sure it's not sticking through the fences too much at least anyway, add a quick surface and we should have a nice little effect here, nice and simple. Now of course we want to make sure that's well away from residential, people wouldn't want to be looking out the window at that mess. And then along the various sort of units on both sides of the roads, we're going to add a little bit of a combination of vehicles. Now this one I think we can have that as a bit of a car rental or a van rental perhaps, maybe, I think that makes sense. And here and there where we're not going to have any additional vehicles as props, we're going to add a little bit of a kind of untidy looking, messy bit of waste ground really. So we use solid good old light riverbed, and then we're going to sort of add layers on top of that with some more props and more vegetation. Oaks always come in pretty good, sink them all down, and we'll certainly use them as edging along some of the buildings as well. Here and there, an occasional little palm tree I think is in order, and then once I did this I actually changed my mind and started ripping them out. What I decided to do is add some little informal paths where perhaps people are coming in and out of the buildings and they are taking shortcuts through different parts of the town. I do like adding these little paths, these little shortcuts and whatnot. Obviously you'd seen them on the beach there earlier, we want to try and add a few of them in and about town as well. And obviously you see these everywhere in life as well, don't you, when they don't have paths. That little courtyard that we formed by surrounding it with different assets is in place. A bit of cheap detail in there using those net lanes, we've got a nice sort of checked effect. Just stick in a couple of tables and a couple of umbrellas and we're good to go. So in terms of detailing, nothing too mad, we'll just rip out those surfaces because they look absolutely stinking, and we are going to put in some net lines as well. Again, nice and detailed, super simple, really easy, stick a few props on and you're good to go. Of course, right at the beginning of the episode we put down our college buildings, and now it's time to kind of come back and really make it fit into the build. The inspiration I'm going to be using for some of the detailing is the Sacred Heart College in Suva. Now in the real life Suva there are a number of developments in the same area that you can draw a bit of inspiration from. You get the Sacred Heart College, you've actually got Suva Grammar School which is an even bigger development, and then you've got a teacher's college next door as well, and there's a primary school, a pretty big one too. We're definitely not short on ideas, and I ended up finding myself on the Facebook page for the college just to kind of see what it was looking like at street level. It was pretty interesting. Obviously there was some play areas, wasn't quite a basketball court, but it kind of looked like one, but it didn't have any markings. Can't really take the markings away, I'm going to keep them in this particular build. The front of the college was certainly concreted, but it was all kind of broken up, and I think I've tried to recreate that a little bit. Plenty of stones on here as well, and I actually saw these on Sunny's build not too long ago, and I have been meaning to incorporate it in one of my own as well. You can see that they are recolorable. I've recolored them white, and that kind of matches what you'll see in the real life one as well, in fact. So obviously if you're trying to create somewhere that you've never been before, Google Maps, Google Earth is absolutely number one to go and get some ideas and inspiration, but sometimes kind of thinking outside the box and going and having a look at some other sources can give you some really good results, especially that sort of street level stuff where perhaps the Google car can't get to. I wanted plenty of seating areas, I wanted a few sort of shaded areas as well, you certainly see that too. I think I'd maybe like a few more of them, but I reckon probably adding some more trees down here to give some shade might have been a better idea. Now, I definitely want to add some texture, some dirt and all the rest of it into the grass, and I noticed that these stones were just looking a little bit low, so time to move it out and we'll just shift them up a little bit. I want to break up that grass again with some decals and some dirt, and again we'll add some more seating areas and whatnot as well. New mod to PDX, I'm going to be using the Terrain Surfaces pack by Gaga. This looks absolutely superb. It's nice to get some more options with the ground decals, isn't it? I'm not going to go too mad with it. I need to kind of sit down and have a proper play about with them and get them all put out and really see what kind of effect works well. But you can overlap them and you can create some really nice effects with them. Various dirt decals, moss, grass, all that kind of stuff, and it's a really welcome addition to the game. I think anything that breaks up the default vanilla grass is obviously a good thing, right? I reckon I want to get this college all fenced off and make it nice and secure. So get the net lanes out, get it all boxed off, get some of the surfaces in, and we'll just add a few props here and there and give the place a wee bit of life. So what I'll do is I'll pop on a very short time lapse and I'll catch up with you in a minute. So that's pretty much the main town of Suva built out, with the exception of course of that patch of land down by the coast. I think it was the right call ripping out those really tall buildings. They really did kind of stand out, and not particularly in a good way. And of course all that vegetation and surface work that we did kind of pays off when you have a look at it from this angle. Zooming in nice and close, you can really see the individual details coming to life, and there really isn't too much to put that together. Remember, if you have any good ideas for that undeveloped patch of land down at the coast, let me know in the comments. As I said, I'll try and get a little poll together if we've got enough of them, and hopefully we can get something interesting with your input in it as well. Again, a big thank yous in order to KSCS for putting together the assets in the build, having some truly unique university assets and ones that fit the actual size of the development really is very much appreciated. I think with a bit of recolouring work and a bit of landscape work, I think we've got that fitted in really nicely. I have to say, I do feel it's a little bit of a shame having a basketball with no hoops, but it is what it is. But I reckon there's plenty of leisure time there and plenty of seating and all that kind of stuff, you know, keep yourself entertained. That little governmental building, I think I would certainly like to expand on that. There is a strip of land just across the road from it. We didn't build too much on the petrol station side, but I think that's certainly worth a visit, and perhaps something we can make a bit of a feature on the main road into the town. I reckon we've ended up with a really nice beachfront, and these properties at the front I think certainly look very much desirable. These I reckon will be some of the highest end buildings that we're going to be using on the island, and really this is where you're going to get the most wealthy of islanders, I guess, down here. We've fenced off or walled off most of the ones down here at the front. They're all kept nice and secure. We keep the riffraff out. So we recoloured where we could. Not all of them are particularly recolourable, but I think we've done okay, and I definitely wanted some bright colours to go along with some of the washed out whites. Having a look at the expansion of the industry here, and you can see we've gone really light on the props. I really wanted a sort of dirty-ish open area where you can kind of store cars and all that kind of stuff. But taking a wee bit of time just to add some texture and some interest with the, you know, with the broken cars and the junkyard and all that kind of stuff does help. And you see we get plenty of walkability in this island as well. Don't forget, if you want to support the channel, Patreon links are in the description. That's it for me. Have a good one, guys. Take care. I'll see you in the next one.